Tony, I see you, but I think we presented, so I'll allow you to field questions as they come in. But maybe at this point, so that we can allow you to also participate. You've been very good listeners and very quiet. I'm not sure whether worried but I hope you are just listening. So what I will request at this point is that I take some hands and we ask questions or comments or whatever that you want to say, so that in the next 10, 15 minutes we can close the session.
Hi, you talked about 2050 and the global scene of electricity. Realistically, how much of our electricity generation can be generated by renewable energy by when? Because we do have a lot of people who say, oh, we need base load, blah, blah, blah.
Okay, good question. How much can you generate by renewable? The lady in the same table.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Senamile Masango. I'm a nuclear scientist. I would like to congratulate the department with this great initiative, and my question is directed to the Department of Energy. In your plan in improving of our energy mix by 30% of clean energy by 2025, has the department invested in young researchers? Because most of young researchers, they are doing projects that are not relevant or that does not have a high social impact. I'm asking this question because I know the lot of young researchers who have, I'm struggling, okay. I know a lot of young researchers who doesn't have projects and funding as well. And again, we're now going to the fourth industrialization era. Have you involved the Department of Higher Education, because university must produce graduates who are ready for the fourth industrial revolution? Thank you.
Thank you. There's a hand behind you. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Samki Penyane. I'm coming from a company called Pendowell Energy. We are in liquid fuels. My question would be relating to the carbon storage, the carbon capture, which it's basically a new concept to me. We tend to work with medium-sized organizations that are service providers to the mining sector. We supply them with liquid fuels, diesel, petrol. Most of them, when an issue about change or transforming or transiting to new renewable energies, it's always a big issue for them, coming from the capital intensive or an idea that it will be capital intensive. They probably want to move out of the sector or they cannot continue, which you find that a lot of jobs get lost in the process. My question is, yes, transition is necessary. It's where we're all going. To what extent are we actually communicating these interventions like carbon capture? They will continue probably for the next, Tobias has said we're looking at up to 2050 possibly, where we'll actually realize the change. They're not realizing that now. They're thinking, if I cannot use the equipment that I already have, which is probably diesel powered or petrol powered, then obviously I'm just going to get out of the industry because I cannot afford to actually immediately move into the new technologies. If such initiatives and such new interventions that are coming into place get actually communicated, to what extent are we communicating? Are they aware that probably they could be, their carbon emissions could be captured? To what extent can we actually devolve it down to different users at different levels? I assume the pilots are being done and they're probably looking at rather major industries, not actually looking at the other players in the industries. Probably to SANEDI to say, how do we actually get that education going down so that we could save jobs, we could, whilst we are in the transition, we allow that process where people can get to a point where they can use incentives but still be able to continue with the industries that they're in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I'll allow the panel to respond. Anyone can just pick the different questions. But I think the last question revolves around the issues of how do we integrate, because yes, we've approved so many IRPs and etc. IPPs, but how do we integrate that into the grid? At one point, do we use what technology or what source of energy? So maybe let's just allow from you, you can just respond. And I think, Tony, you have a few of your questions too. Okay, thank you. You can take it on. No, respond. No, you must respond. Okay, let's give Tobias to respond.
Okay, I think if I counted correctly, there were 3 questions. Let me go through them quickly. They are all somewhat linked to each other. On the storage side, what you refer to when you say storage, implicitly you refer to power, meaning power in, power out. So in essence, battery storage or pumped hydro. That is not the only form of energy storage that we have. As you rightly say, fossil fuels are a form of energy storage as well, and that hasn't changed. That hasn't changed just because we have a source of power generators that is variable in nature. So what happens in a system that is increasingly dominated by solar and wind is that you need, it's all about the mix, and you need power generators that are flexible enough, both technically and economically, to accompany the variability of solar and wind. So what do I mean with that? From technical perspective, flexible enough to be able to ramp up and down, and to ramp down to the min load levels that are required at night, so that wind doesn't have to be curtailed, but rather the coal fleet doesn't burn coal, which is what is supposed to happen. And economically flexible, meaning you need power generators that kick in when there's not enough wind and no sun, and they will provide maybe 10% of the total energy, while 90% of the energy comes from wind and sun. Now, if you have a power generator that needs to be able to cover the maximum peak demand in the system, but only provides 10% of the energy over the year, you will not do that with a coal-fired power station. Because a coal-fired power station is capital intensive, it's expensive to build, it's cheap to run, and that's exactly the opposite of the profile that you need for the type of backup generator that we are talking about. Same as your diesel generator at home that you have as a backup, it's very inexpensive to build / to buy. It's very expensive to operate, but you don't operate it very often. And that's exactly the characteristic that you need as a backup for solar and wind. And that type of power generator that I'm talking about are gas turbines, gas engines, and as we progress and move forward into 2040 and 2050, we are then talking about batteries as well, hydrogen storage, but these are all future things. Right now, immediately, flexibility can be provided from the existing coal fleet to some extent, and from new build capacity, which should be gas-fired because it's capital light and fuel intensive. And that together with solar and wind gives the cheapest new build option. The question on how much renewables is possible, that is really in South Africa. Let me put it this way: from a greenfield perspective, if you were to build the power system completely, entirely new, from scratch today, not assuming any battery or not assuming any advanced technologies that are not there yet, then you would build a power system that is roughly 90% of its energy, wind and solar, and 10% from something else, flexibility, gas-fired, biogas, whatever provides the flexibility. That's roughly greenfield approach, 90% renewable share. Now, in reality, we are looking at a brownfield system. There is an existing coal fleet. So how much renewable share South Africa will achieve by 2050 is really a function of how quickly the coal fleet ramps down. That is, as we have seen in recent months, is only partially something that is fully under control, because the coal fleet is aging with such a speed that we might, even the decommissioning schedule that we have at the moment might not be the correct one. But 90-10 without any technological improvement is what would happen in a greenfield approach. And if by 2050 there's only Medupi left and maybe a few units of Kusile, then that's roughly the share that you're looking at. In terms of intermittency, I put that in inverted commas. I first would like to correct that, because very technically speaking, the definition of intermittent is an event that is unforeseeable, unpredictable, and that happens instantaneously and very suddenly. And it's a sudden change in output of a signal. Now, intermittency in the power sector is very well known, because the entire reserves in the power system have always been built around the intermittent event, the largest intermittent event that could happen in the power system. In a conventional power system, what is that? That's the trip of the largest coal station, the largest coal units, or of a Kuwait unit. The collapse of a coal silo is an intermittent event. 5 minutes before that collapse, nobody would have known that that coal silo will collapse and that subsequently 3 gigawatts of coal-fired power station will be lost. That's intermittent. The combined aggregated portfolio output of a wind fleet and a solar fleet spread across the country is not intermittent. It's variable. Variable means it changes over time, but the changes, the gradients, are not instantaneously, are not seconds or milliseconds. They are changes that happen over 15 minutes, an hour, daily. Yeah? And they are very well, the closer you get to the event, the better predictable they are. So what we have to deal with is variability on the supply side from solar and wind. And that variability, it's very well predictable. So what we need to do, we need to accompany the variability with flexible power generators and demand side flexibility on the other side. And both together are then giving the symphony of an electricity system that gives the cheapest and the most reliable power.
Okay. Sis Mukhadi, there's a question around nuclear. I know it's like a swear word to other people. I'm sure you'll be able to answer these questions about nuclear.
Okay, thank you. On the question of 30% clean energy technologies by 2025, more in particular on research for young or emerging researchers, let me just indicate that we work with other relevant departments. So my question would be, my answer would be broad as well because the question is broad. We work with academic institutions. Like for example, in the speech, I indicated that SANEDI is implementing the R&D component of the draft solar energy technology roadmap. There are research areas that still needs to be researched further, while taking into account that some are doing research that does not have social impact. If the department is approached, we're always able to assist on specific research areas. I know for a fact that through the Department of Science and Technology, through the NRF, they have been funding some of the postgraduate qualifications in the clean energy space, in particular renewables. The department also sits on the council for the advisory body for the Renewable Energy Center for University of Stellenbosch. And in that case, we're able to input. And I must say, most of our institutions have now moved towards also addressing the needs on the ground. I know University of Johannesburg, through its mechanical engineering section, have been doing a lot of research in terms of the transport sector, particularly on solar powered formula cars, for lack of a better word. We have worked with Department of Higher Education and Training to support SARETEC in the renewable energy space, to not only bring the element of research, but also the practical nature in terms of making sure that the technicians are trained within the renewable energy space. One of the examples that we had to address in the beginning, when the renewable energy deployment started in the country, we realized that some of the things are not practical wherein from the operations and maintenance perspective, because when our turbines, packed up, then we will be waiting for technicians from outside the country, which is not realistic. So we need to have our own to be trained. On that part, we also have another program, South African Wind Energy Program, which has moved over years, phase 1, phase 2, we are now on phase 3. There are research areas there that have come up where we're working together with South African Weather Services, Science and Technology, CSIR, SANEDI. There are areas there. SANEDI as well has offered bursaries in terms of the research areas that can be looked further. We also have a global environment facility program funded standards and appliance labeling program. So these are some of the cleaner energy technologies, but overall, the department has gone throughout the country in the past 3 years in terms of highlighting opportunities in the energy sector, not opportunities only in on the basis of business, but also in areas that would present research areas. So I would say we have tried as much as possible to share even with academics. So the young or emerging researchers that you're talking about, they are more than welcome to approach the department so that we look at areas where they can do projects that have social impact. So like when I spoke, I indicated that for socio-economic projects, we need to work together. If you look at the social corporate responsibility projects that normally the IPPs are giving, so those are some of the areas that can be researched further from the cleaner energy technologies in line with the 30% cleaner energy input.
Okay. No, thank you. I'm sure you have heard you can approach after this session and take it further. Tony, maybe just to close up on carbon capture. How are we popularizing it? How far are we from sinking the first ton of carbon into the ground?
To answer your last question, probably 2020 we should be able to put some carbon dioxide in the ground.
So next year?
Yeah, or maybe the year after.
Okay.
It depends how fast we can go. I want to, while I have the opportunity, say, what is the purpose of carbon capture and storage? Its only purpose is to decrease CO2 emissions in the atmosphere. Why? Because of climate change. And South Africa has committed itself to a certain level of decreasing emissions. But however, irrespective of climate change issues, I believe we should be doing a lot more work in renewables. Why? Fossil fuels are finite. Eventually, they'll run out as economic source of energy. And it takes a lot longer to transition between one form of energy and another than most people believe. So that's why we're looking at carbon capture and storage as a transition measure. If you're looking at, and why is it going to, the second part of why it can be transitional is that we're not expecting all carbon, all coal just to close down now. In fact, if South Africa just closed all its coal-fired power stations, anything else that burns coal, it would have no impact at all on climate change. It has to be something that's done in concert with the rest of the world. Because remember that carbon dioxide is a global issue. It's not a South African issue, it's global. And that's why we participate in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So what we're expecting is that as plant reaches its end of lifetime, then it can change to something more efficient. But carbon capture and storage is only one option. I'm giving a course at Wits Business School soon on, there are a number of options to decarbonize energy. Carbon capture and storage is only one of them. And if you are compelled by regulation or whatever to decrease your carbon dioxide emissions, you look at all the different options and take the best and the least cost one in order to do that. If also, it may pay to have a look at the Environmental Affairs has released a draft bill, a climate change bill, which addresses these particular issues. And also, what else did I want to say? Yes, is that we need to do a lot more renewables. But renewables relies on that great nuclear reactor in the sky. And that's when we're...
The sun.
The sun. And in fact, that's even where all our carbon comes from. The coal, oil and gas still is derived from 100 million years ago of biomass being buried and converted into fossil fuels. Okay. So it is a transition. We're not expecting to use carbon capture and storage to eliminate all of our carbon emissions. is being estimated at 10%, which is just over 40 million tonnes a year. And as I said earlier on, Sasol, well, let's not just point out on Sasol all the time, but our synthetic fuel industry, Sasol and PetroSA, they're putting out about 30 million tonnes of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That means the capture, most of the capture part has been done, and capture is about half the cost. There's also another example, Laxness in Newcastle, of their own volition put in a carbon capture plant because they required carbon dioxide as part of their process to produce chromium. And they've done that on a commercial basis. So it's a lot less expensive for them to capture and utilize than would be to buy carbon dioxide from elsewhere.
Yeah.
I think I should stop there.
Okay. No, thank you. Let me thank the panel members and thank everyone for participating. Program Director, do you want to come and close? But I wanted just to say thank you to everyone for taking time to be with us this morning. We hope to see many of you in the next breakfast session. And let's go out there and do something about the future of this country. Program Director, thank you.
Well, I would also like to thank the panelists, and I actually think that, I don't think we've even scratched the surface, because I think the questions that need to be answered are so many, and they are so vast. And I think our next breakfast, also I think we should maybe dig deeper and understand why we are not deploying as much of these technologies as we should be, given the fact that we have all these abundant resources that we talk. We've got like sun forever, we've got wind that blows everywhere, and we have a coastline that's so long. I mean, so why are we not using and harnessing all those energy? But for today, I think we come to the end of our session, and I would like to thank you very much for being such a wonderful audience. And thank you. And I think there's more coffee if you need some. And you can, if the people are still here, you can still network and have chats with the people who are still here. Thank you very much.